This is the Regular Pastor Podcast, a podcast devoted to regular pastors serving regular churches. My name is Landon Coleman. I'm a regular pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Odessa, Texas. You have found your way to Season 5 of the Regular Pastor Podcast. Welcome. Glad that you're here. In Season 5, I'm talking about books and ideas and how these books and their ideas relate to the day-to-day ministry of regular pastors like myself and probably like you. The book that I'm going to talk about today is titled On Getting Out of Bed. It has a great cover, has an alarm clock with some roses, and really a nice-looking book. The author is Alan Noble. This book was published by IVP, InterVarsity, 2023. It's 109 pages. The last 4 to 5 pages are in notes, and the format of this book is a small format hardcover. This is a short book. It has 8 chapters. It's a quick read, not something that you're going to get bogged down in and feel like you have to really sled through. Let me tell you a little bit about Alan Noble. He has a PhD from Baylor. We'll forgive him for being a Baylor alum. He is a professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. So if you listen to the previous episode, we talked about a book by Matthew Emerson. He's also a professor at OBU. OBU has quite an academic faculty in the religion department, and Alan Noble is part of that faculty. He is the editor-in-chief of Christ and Pop Culture, which is a website that has all sorts of stuff, resources, articles about film, TV, music, books, politics, science, sports, video games, all kinds of stuff. Christ and Pop Culture, worth checking out. Noble is a regular contributor for The Atlantic and for Vox and for BuzzFeed and the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today and First Things. He does a lot of writing. He is also the author of Disruptive Witness, and he's the author of a book titled You Are Not Your Own. Let's talk about the big idea or the summary of this book. Noble gives it to you right out of the gate in the author's note, page 1. He says the subject of this book is mental suffering, and the assumption is that everyone experiences mental suffering at one point or another. So that's what he's talking about in this book on getting out of bed. Not physical suffering, not political suffering, not illness, not economic hardship, but mental suffering. And his assumption is that this is something that all of us will experience at some point in life. A few things he goes on to talk about. He says life is difficult, and we experience that difficulty in different ways and to varying extents, but we always experience it in our hearts and minds. That experience is the subject of the book. Just a page over, he says this, in talking about mental affliction. He's not offering professional medical advice because he's not a medical professional. He's not writing a memoir or a self-help book. It's a really important disclaimer right at the get-go. There at the end of this opening section, opening chapter, he says, your life is a good gift from a loving God, even when subjectively it doesn't feel good or like a gift, and even when you doubt that God is loving. Please get out of bed anyway. So you see the tie-in there to the title of the book, On Getting Out of Bed. We're talking in this book about mental suffering, mental anguish, and not writing a memoir, not offering a self-help book, but writing about something that all of us experience at one point or another. Let me give you a few important ideas from this book. One that I think is worth mentioning is on page 8, and this is in chapter 1, the first actual content chapter of the book. Noble talks about the fact that our culture thinks every problem can be solved with a technique or a pill or a policy. And our culture's wrong about that. We are a fix-it, pragmatic, can-do kind of people. And so when there's a problem, we look not always for the underlying cause, but we look for a quick, easy fix. And that's just not going to work when it comes to mental suffering and mental anguish. One of the things he talks about in the next chapter, chapter 2, is the fact that life is hard. And when it comes to depression and anxiety, the answers and the solutions to those problems are rarely clear. We're complex people. Life is hard, and there are rarely clear answers to depression, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. So I think that's a good insight right from the get-go. He's not writing a self-help book. He's not offering a quick fix. He's not saying that these things can be solved easily or with the right technique or just the right combination of medicine. One of the things that I think is worth sharing from this book is on page 14. And on page 14, he says this: each morning, it's you. Each morning, it's you. Each morning, you must choose to get out of bed or not. All the medication and cognitive therapy and the latest research and the self-care in the world can't replace your choice. This decision can be aided by these resources, but never replaced by them, which means that you have to have an answer to a fundamental question. Why get out of bed? Or more bluntly, why live? In this book, Noble is talking about this fundamental choice that you have to make day in and day out. You're not going to have the choice as to whether or not you're going to experience mental suffering. You will, not consistently, not always intensely, but you will experience mental suffering. And what comes down to you each and every day is, are you going to get out of bed? Are you going to face life? Are you going to press on? And realizing the importance and the inevitability of that choice is an important step in learning how to live with and deal with mental suffering. To jump to the back of the book, let me give you one more helpful idea. This is back on page 88, and Noble says this: I think we have professionalized some of the basic life care that used to be done by mentors, parents, grandparents, older people in the church, elders, pastors, teachers, and otherwise people. Our economy tends to commercialize and professionalize everything, including the most basic human interactions, such as mentorship, friendship, and discipleship. He's just making the point that Americans professionalize everything. And sometimes the real answer is get off your screen, quit running the rat race, enjoy a genuine relationship with the people or one of the persons that God has placed into your lives. Noble's not saying that you don't need a counselor. He's not saying that you shouldn't pay a life coach. He's not even saying that you shouldn't see a medical professional at some point. He's simply saying that we over-professionalize advice, wisdom, and counsel. And there's a danger in that. I'll talk about a book later in this season that warns us of the danger of listening too much to the quote-unquote experts or the quote-unquote professionals, a book by Abigail Shire, Bad Therapy. But Noble's onto something similar here. You may need a counselor, you may need a medical professional in your life, but you may just need a friend or a spiritual leader or a family member to speak truth into your life, and maybe, if nothing more, just to listen to the things that you're struggling with and that you're experiencing with. If I had to give you a favorite quote from this book, I would look at page 45. And on page 45, short quote, Noble says, moments create momentum. Moments create momentum. When you choose to do the next thing, neither accepting nor denying the anxiety or depression you carry, you create the momentum that makes the next thing a bit easier to manage. And The converse is true. When you can't do the next thing, everything becomes harder to manage. Sometimes people get paralyzed looking down the road and thinking about all the things that they know they're going to have to do, the progress they're going to have to make. But you don't have to solve that momentum problem immediately. You just have to make a decision in one moment. And the next moment, that next decision will be a little bit easier or maybe a little bit harder. Let's talk about ministry takeaway. I think regular pastors know that people in your congregation are going to bring their problems to you. There is certainly a time in the life of your people when you need to send them for professional help. There's also a time when you need to listen and you need to understand, and you don't need to try to fix people like there's some kind of problem to be managed. You don't need to offer them some kind of technique or medical promise. Sometimes what people need is to be heard and to know that they aren't the only ones dealing with a certain issue. They're not alone. They're not weird. They're not the outlier. They just need to be heard, and they need you to tell them that the things that they're facing are normal human experiences. If I had to critique or offer criticism for this book, I don't know that I really have anything to point out by way of critique. I do think it's interesting. There's no solutions really offered in this book. There's not a lot of do this, think this in order to alleviate your suffering on this side of eternity. I think what there is in this book is a healthy dose of realism. And some people may read it and view it as pessimism, but if you hold to a biblical view of sin and the fall and the fact that creation is groaning under the weight of this curse that's yet to be lifted, I don't think it's pessimism. I just think it's realism. If you get on Goodreads, you will find that this book has a 4.34 rating. I gave it a 5-star rating on Goodreads. I think it's a wonderful read, quick read, and worthy of your consideration, especially if you're a regular pastor. So that brings me to the question, who should read it? And I think if you're a pastor and you're responsible for caring for people, this is a helpful book for you to think through. I think if you're a professional counselor and you're responsible for listening to people and offering them advice, I think this is a helpful book that you should work through and think through. I think if you're a parent or a grandparent and you're responsible for raising people in a world that's marked by suffering, I think this is a book that you should give attention to. And last, I think if you're suffering, if you're looking for answers, but you're tired of the endless drip of technique and tips and tricks and life hacks that don't seem to get you anywhere, I think this would be a helpful book for you to read and to think through. On Getting Out of Bed by Alan Noble. Thanks for listening to the Regular Pastor Podcast. You can subscribe for weekly episodes. You can follow me online at regularpastor.com. You can find me on Goodreads, Landon Coleman. And if you've got a book recommendation or something you'd like for me to read and review here on the podcast, let me know. Landon at EmmanuelOdessa.com. Until next week, this is the Regular Pastor, out.